let's go a little further into this whole idea of central bank digital currencies or surveillance coins or control coins. What are they, and why is the BIS so excited about this?
Well, central bank digital currencies, they're essentially, why the biz is excited about them is because they provide efficiencies. So that's all the biz really thinks about is how can we make capital movement more efficient? How can we make cross-border transactions more efficient? And then they actually provide an easier transmission of monetary policy because you'd have a direct account at the central bank. So, today, when we do monetary policy, it basically create bank reserves, and then it depends on the banks to loan out those funds to Main Street. And so it's very inefficient. And so that's been an ongoing problem. With central bank digital currencies, what would happen was an individual would have a direct claim with the central bank, the CBDC with the central bank. And so that would allow them to do all kinds of new things with monetary policy that they can't do today. And it would actually allow them to see how it's working in the economy in real time. Right now, they have to depend on delayed reports from banks to see how the monetary policy is actually getting into the real economy. With a CBDC, there's a lot of benefits for them for how they kind of elicit their monetary policy, kind of bring it into the economy, as well as just cross-border payments and all these efficiency gains from it.
So what kind of impacts could we see to those of us just everyday individuals out there if CBDCs were to be proliferated more broadly?
Well, for us, I mean, essentially, it would kind of infringe on our privacy and our freedom, right? So our freedom of choice of if everything is cashless and you only have a CBDC, that really gives them a lot of power. So they can do anything they want, really. Any kind of monetary policy, if you don't like it, there's really nothing you can do. And this is in a world without Bitcoin, right? But they would be basically, if they wanted to do negative interest rates, they could do it. If they wanted to say hey, we want to give only the monetary policy to this specific cohort of people who did this. We want to cut people access off from the financial system because they're dissidents and we don't agree with what they're saying. They could do that. So it's kind of a more draconian world. And then what they would be able to do is get all your data. I mean, they would have basically all your financial data to use and to analyze. And so it would basically set up this potential for state surveillance and control. So yeah, it's kind of scary to think about what could come from that. I think the Bank of International Settlements, I think there's probably some good people in there, good-natured people who actually have good intentions with this stuff. And they're just thinking about the benefits, but they don't think about how this could be used, poorly against the people. And so those are what the potential scenarios are if we did get on this account-based CBD system with a digital ID system combined with it.
I see. So summarizing, essentially, if central banks had complete oversight into the money using a CBDC, they could essentially see everything that's going on in the system. Any semblance of privacy would be gone, and they could start to very specifically target monetary policy, and they could start to target very individual people's access to things. They might say, we don't want you to spend your coin on air flights because you have used this XYZ number of emissions, or we don't want you to purchase this kind of food because we think that's not healthy or not aligned with our sponsors. So there could be all kinds of ways where a person might go into this with good intentions, even if we were to steelman that view and say, well, we're going to use it to stop the terrorists or whatever.
Yep.
The reality is, even in that sense, there's still going to be a massive loss of freedom and a massive loss of autonomy for the everyday person.
Yeah, and they say that. I mean, they say it in their own jargon. They say it. I mean, they say, in addition, we would have programmable and allow information-specific monetary transfers. That's how they say it, right? But if you decipher that, that's basically what you just said, right? They'd be able to have specific information to give monetary transfers. And if you think about how the independence of the Fed has basically eroded over the last, 5 years or so, and how close they are to Treasury, you can see how politics can get involved with this power. And so that's when it kind of gets scary.
Right. And additionally, it might push things more in a global direction, right? So currently, the world does not have a global government. There are something like 200 nations on the earth today, but to some extent, this push towards global central bank digital currencies may mean an attempt to supersede each nation's own sovereignty and control.
Yeah. And I would say that they already have that power. They've already wielded that for decades. Like I said, they basically influence policy decisions on these governments. So they're kind of already do that, but this would just give them more ability to do that. And so we could probably talk about this at some point, but like the multi CBDC systems that they're setting up, they really say like one rule book, but they don't say like who would write that rule book or who would enforce it. Who would it be? Would it be a committee of central bankers? And they like just like the ECB or the Bank of International Settlements, when they're under these international treaties, there's nothing anybody can do about it, like literally. And so, yeah, that's kind of why I'm so passionate about getting this information out there, because I feel like, in a way, the sovereignty of nations are at risk here of these organizations, these supranational organizations.
I see, yeah. And so as you mentioned, we might as well go into that. So with multi-CBDCs, can you give us an overview of what kinds of ideas they are proposing here?
Essentially, they realize that all these central banks are working on central bank digital currencies. There's I think something greater than 80% of them have a pilot program or have been doing research into them, but they're realizing that it's not going to work if everyone just has their own little CBD system. That doesn't help anything, because that would be extremely inefficient. And so their idea was to get them all on one system that would have one digital ID system, as well as one rule book for the monetary system, the infrastructure, and one person or a group of people or an organization would be the operator of that system. And so they're trying to make the interoperability of these payment systems to reduce friction. Their idea was to have this global CBDC system under one rule book. And so they don't really specify. It's really early days with this one, that they're just getting into this. It'll probably take them over a decade to try to do something like this, but that's kind of the idea behind it.
Right. And so sometimes it's almost like they float a trial balloon out there, and then eventually over time that idea does actually come to fruition. And so I guess on one point we could think, well, hang on, how feasible is it that all of these, say 200 different countries, or even let's say 100 of the larger ones, how realistic is it that we would see them agree? Because in many cases they have different values, different religion, different culture, different ideas. Yeah. How likely is it that all the central banks, or say the governments of those large nations, would be able to agree, given, at least to some extent, they have countering interests with each other?
Yeah, obviously, the world's pretty divided right now, so you'd think it wouldn't be that likely, but honestly, I think there's probably higher probability than you think, because when the world goes to shit and there's actual crises, what happens is these central bankers get together at these accords, at these committees, at these conferences, specifically in Basel at the Bank of International Settlements, where they have these discussions and they try to rebuild the system, create a new system. And it reminds me a lot, these multi-CBDCs, it reminds me of the euro, because the euro was actually the Bank of International Settlements' child. They created it in 1989 at the Delors Committee. They got together and they basically wrote this paper about the European Union, to European integration. And it's this kind of the same thing, where you have all these different countries with different cultures. But what the BIS did was they created the European Union, again, under international treaty. And then the same thing. They wrote about 15 working papers similar to the CBDC, of all these working papers about the euro. And then in 1999, fast forward, the Treaty of Amsterdam, the European Central Bank is created with the biz under the same legal immunities, and it manages 27 countries. And when the countries join the Eurozone, they give up their sovereignty, their monetary sovereignty, to the European Central Bank. And what happened with the euro is what you're saying, where it goes back to the biz. They don't think about the political, the culture, anybody. They just think, wow, this is going to be great. Trade is going to flow and it's going to be really efficient if everybody's on one currency. But what they found out was that everyone's different. Like Germans like to save more, Greeks spend more, and they all had their own fiscal policy and tax policies and spending. So it's been kind of a mess with the euro. I mean, it's been a disaster. So the multi-CBDCs remind me a lot of the euro with the Bank of International Settlements, because it's the same thing. But they're doing it at the global stage. They're trying to put every single country with different needs, different cultures under one essential monetary policy, under one rule book. And we saw how it happened with the euro and how it went, but they're still thinking this is a good idea. So I think it is possible. I think, is it likely? I'm not sure. It's pretty hefty lift for them to get this not only built, but then to get everybody agree to it. I mean, things would probably have to be pretty rough out there in terms of the current system maybe collapsing or being in trouble for this to actually get pushed through, I think. But it's possible.
Yeah. Yeah, the point you make around the analogy with the euro is a good one, because in the same way, for the EU to be formed as well and strengthened, the sovereignty of each of the composite or the part of the nations had to be diminished in some way, because they had to give up some of that power. And this reminds us a lot of the Brexit debate. Basically, a couple of years ago, the same arguments were made about how people in the UK were not happy about the impact of the EU on the lawmakers in the UK. And so it's a very similar argument there. And so I think that might end up being a bit like that, where countries get dragged into this multi-CBDC, and then later there are arguments between them about how the laws should be done, or how the inflation should be done, or even how the policies and the surveillance should be done, exactly, and what things should be surveilled or controlled, because, some drugs might be legal in some countries and illegal in others. And then it's like, well, who gets to control what?
This holiday season, give the gift of Bitcoin to your loved ones. Swan delivers your Bitcoin gift along with our world-class education and client service. Create a Bitcoin gift and wrap it with a custom message for your family and friends. Dash away with your gift. Your recipient will receive an email right away, that easy. Give the gift of generational wealth. Give Bitcoin.